The Minnesota Timberwolves splashed the cash on Rudy Gobert in the 2022 offseason, but it's safe to say they haven't particularly reaped their rewards just yet, and they were thoroughly outclassed by the Warriors earlier this week, which led to criticism of both Gobert and Karl-Anthony Towns. Today, we are discussing the criticism of both players, plus the top 5 heaviest losses in NBA history, so stay right where you are. Let's jump straight in and discuss criticisms of the Timberwolves star men. The Timberwolves were delighted as they managed to acquire Rudy Gobert over the summer, but their investment hasn't particularly paid off thus far. Just this past Sunday, they were handed a thorough drubbing by Steph Curry and co. as the Warriors rolled into town, losing 114 to 137. Curry was instrumental throughout, but the Wolves' performance left a lot to be desired as they were dominated in the paint. Their lack of firepower going forward was also called into question, as Towns and Gobert combined for just 30 points, which was highlighted by their performances against the smaller Kevon Looney as well as Draymond Green. Looney kept both men relatively quiet, and after the game, Austin Rivers appeared to throw a little shade, saying, "If we are going to play big, we've got to dominate in the paint. If we're going to play big, we've got to be big." Their big man was Draymond today. The problem for the Wolves appears to be discipline. Whilst Gobert is on the court, they seem to be in disarray when defending, which has been highlighted by his own personal career low of 108 in the defensive ranking department. Of course, we're still only 20 games in, but it doesn't look good so far when their starters are on the floor with Rudy. With Gobert in positions where he has to defend on the perimeter or switch to a smaller guard, the Wolves are suffering an imbalance. What have you made of their poor start to the season? We're looking at some of the heaviest losses in NBA history now, starting with the Sacramento Kings. Nobody likes losing, even less so when you or your team are at the end of one of the worst beatings in the history of the sport, which is what happened on November 2nd, 1991. The Kings traveled to Warriors Arena, having won their opening game of the season, but any confidence they might have gained from their season curtain raiser quickly dissolved as they were absolutely hammered by Golden State. The final score of 153-91 didn't flatter the Warriors, who had Chris Mullin to thank for his 32-point haul, all of which surprisingly came in the first half. Victor Alexander also contributed with 28 points, and the Warriors could count themselves unlucky in the end as they just missed out on a 19-year-old NBA record for the largest winning margin in history, a record they would have been delighted to beat as it came against their own franchise back in 1972 when the Lakers beat them 162-99. The Kings team of the early 90s weren't great, to be fair, and the season before their drubbing at the hands of the Warriors, they had lost 40 of 41 games on the road, so it was probably no surprise that particular team were on the end of one of the worst beatings in NBA history. After the game, Warriors coach Don Nelson described the win as a nice surprise. Do you remember this one? Next up, it's Golden State Warriors versus Los Angeles Lakers from 1972. Stay tuned. Another game involving the Warriors, and one we briefly mentioned above, the Lakers held the record for the largest winning margin in NBA history for 19 years, until the Cavaliers changed all that in 1991, but more on that in a bit. Considered one of the greatest teams in history, the 72 Lakers featured legends of the game such as Wilt Chamberlain, Gail Goodrich, and Jerry West, and on March 19, 1972, the Warriors were simply no match for the LA outfit, as they were blown away 162-99. What makes this one even stranger is that the Warriors weren't a particularly bad team, and both sides were heading for the playoffs, but the Lakers seemed hell-bent on giving them a lesson and showing them they simply were not in their league. The 63-point winning margin saw 8 Lakers players on the score sheet, with Goodrich leading the way with 30 points. The win was so incredible that the record stood for close to 2 decades, and the Lakers would go on to win the NBA championship that year with one of the most dominant teams of not just the 70s, but the 20th century. Whilst wins of this nature are few and far between, it's not really a surprise that a team this good were the ones handing out this particular beating. Give us your best Lakers team of all time below. We're talking the Portland Trail Blazers' 1998 loss to the Indiana Pacers next. The Trail Blazers were thoroughly outclassed and embarrassed back in February 1998, as they were on the receiving end of one of the worst beatings of all time. The loss was so bad that it was actually the first time a team had conceded more than double the amount of points they had managed to score. The 124-59 drubbing at the hands of the Pacers saw the Portland outfit barely surpass the record low of 57 points in a game, and it was really the perfect storm of the Trail Blazers being so bad defensively, coupled with the Pacers' magnificent attack. After the game, Pacers guard Reggie Miller said, "We played well, but I didn't think we would be capable of holding an NBA team under 60 points. A team with so many offensive weapons. We really have to pat each guy on the back in here for busting their behinds for 48 minutes. The Trailblazers actually came within just 3 points of the worst defeat of all time, but that will be of no consolation, as they still gave up a losing margin of 65 points. A team hadn't really come close to doubling another team's score for almost 50 years, when the Minneapolis Lakers beat the Milwaukee Hawks by 99-51 back in 1951. But this again will be a very little consolation to Portland fans. What did you guys make of this one? The Miami Heat versus Cleveland Cavaliers 1991 matchup is coming through now. Stay tuned. 1991 was a busy year for serious beatings in the NBA. The Cavaliers would smash the Lakers' long-standing record as they breezed past the Miami Heat in one of the most one-sided NBA games of all time. The game ended in a 68-point deficit as the Cleveland outfit ran out 148-80 winners over a poor Heat side. Most Miami players could only muster single-digit figures during the game as they were outclassed from the first play to the last, making sure December 17, 1991 is a date etched into the memory of Heat fans forever. Miami Heat's Grant Long would correctly observe years later that the game would be the last thing that we'll be known for, before trying to put a bit of spin on a terrible situation by adding, even though it's a negative, let's hang on to it. At one point during the huge blowout, the Cavs were actually leading by 73 points in what would have been easily the highest win margin in history to this day. So we guess there was some slight silver lining, if it can be called that. And somewhat surprisingly, no Cavaliers player scored more than 18 points in what was a game crying out for some huge personal scores. Have you guys watched this one back? Give us your thoughts on the game below. And finally, it's the Grizzlies' 73-point win over the Thunder last year, in a scoreline which probably won't be matched anytime soon, and also the most recent entry to today's list. The Grizzlies absolutely decimated the Thunder in December last year. The Memphis Grizzlies ran up a record-winning margin of 73 points as they pummeled a Thunder team devoid of star men Josh Giddey and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. But that was no excuse for the horrendous shift their replacements put in. The Grizzlies stormed the Cavaliers' previous record by 5 points as Jaren Jackson Jr. helped himself to 27 on the night, with a further 8 Grizzlies men getting into double figures. After the rout, Thunder coach Mark Daigneault claimed, "Tonight is not necessarily who we are," before adding, "I think we've definitely shown that from a competitive standpoint. This isn't indicative of who our team is." However, the reality of the situation was that the Thunder were quite literally woeful. I mean, the Grizzlies had scored double the amount of points the Thunder had by halftime, which was simply a sign of things to come. D'Anthony Melton, who helped himself to 19 points, said after the game, "Man, it feels great. It feels great to be in the history books, especially in front of our home crowd." Great stuff. As always, thanks for dropping by today, and remember to tune in again next time for some more fun and games. And don't forget to like today's video, whilst also subscribing to our channel so not to miss out on more great bits in future. Bye guys!